Hello, my name is Yardeni, and today's workshop is about healing with and through nature. So before I start, I want to introduce myself. My name is Yardeni. I'm originally from Israel. And a bit about my background. Um, I was in the Special Forces for 4.5 years, and then went on to become a social worker. And my profession became wilderness therapy and nature-based therapy. So working with different individuals and groups outside in different settings in different ways to really bring healing and change into their lives with and through nature. I moved to the US 3 years ago, and beginning of 2019, I became the Therapeutic Director of the Climbing Grief Fund. And since then, I've been a part of this program that's been attempting to evolve the conversation in our community and in our industry around issues of grief, trauma, loss, and mental health in the climbing, ski mountaineering, and alpinism world, both on the community side and on the industry side. Um, and yeah, I'm here with you today to share a bit about my perspective, a few researches and evidence-based content around trauma and grief and stress and how they impact our lives, our bodies, our minds, um, and how we can um, foster healing through our relationship with the natural world. And so today's workshop, we're going to talk about some frameworks about stress, two specifically, and how they impact our lives. And through these frameworks, hopefully, it'll help people understand the internal processes of what is going on inside and also in our bodies when stress comes knocking on our door. Next is we'll learn a bit about how to respond in a moment and help others when there's a crisis. And so what mental health first aid or first responders do and what it looks like, and just share some education about that. So if and when something does happen, you'd be able to show up and support in a in a helpful way and not a damaging way. Then we'll talk about resourcing a bit and what the difference between what are the resources in our lives and what are the outlets in our lives, and just to understand how to utilize the different things in our lives to be able to bring healing in its different ways. And then we'll end by talking about healing with and through nature and what role nature plays in different healing processes. I want to begin this workshop by just acknowledging how humbled I am to be doing this work and to share my perspective and my learnings over the years around these issues. And also acknowledging that there are a lot of other professionals and experts out there that are doing similar work, and they have a lot to offer. And this is my offering to our community, and understanding also that everything that I've learned and I'm about to share with you is also through a biased lens of my lived experience as a cis, white presenting heterosexual man. And to understand that there's a context in which we all live in, and that there's a context through which I see the world, and that I share these things with you, and my own examples that I'll give throughout this workshop of sharing my own personal lived experience around trauma and grief and stress and healing. And coming to you with this body and these social identities comes a lot of power and privilege as well. And so things can be and are skewed through that power and privilege. And I just wanted to name that and acknowledge that before we move forward, and to take it for what it is. And again, understanding that there are many different lived experiences out there. And I am happy to be here and share mine, along with being a professional as well. And it's impossible to untie both of those things. Like, I am both a professional, and have learned and experienced a lot of these things, and I am also who I am. And so to just take that for what it is. One framework about stress that I really, really appreciate, and use a lot in my own work, is the stress continuum and the stress injuries. I was introduced to this by Laura McLadry. She's a nurse practitioner, and she works with the Responder Alliance. So the stress injury and the stress continuum basically depathologizes trauma and stress. So in the conventional mental health world, there's a book, a very big, thick book called the DSM, which notes all the mental health disorders. And one of them is post-traumatic stress disorder. And through this book and through this like medical model, it sees stress and trauma as a disorder, which means that there are certain boxes that one has to check off in order to be considered having post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. And once that person is diagnosed with PTSD, there's a certain protocol, both like through therapy and medication, of how to heal or approach this disorder. And the stress injury continuum basically says we all have stress. Stress is a natural part of life. Different people have different exposure to stress, and stress is accumulated over time. And so it sees the human life as a series of events, that some of them are less stressful or traumatic and some more. And understanding that there's accumulated stress that people are exposed to over time. And that depends on people's lived experience, obviously. And so instead of seeing it like whether you have stress or you don't, or you have trauma or you don't, it actually says we all have stress, we all have trauma, and this is a continuum, and people find themselves in different places on that continuum. And the reason why I really like this model is that it actually validates that human experience of just being exposed to stress and trauma. And it's not something far-fetched. It's not something that belongs to them or the other people. It belongs to me and you and just everyone around us, because it's part of being alive. And so it validates, it depathologizes, and it recognizes that we all have it, and to certain extents. And yeah, so that's why I just really appreciate it, and I use it a lot with my clients, with myself. So let's take a look at what this stress continuum looks like. I'm sharing my screen right now, and this is taken out of the Responder Alliance website. And again, it's a continuum that we all can place ourselves on, and we'll just start from the beginning. So the green is ready, or relaxed, or rest. It means that you have effective communication, that you can register information clearly, that you can respond clearly, that you're focused, that there's activity, both like socially and engaging with other people, and also spiritually, that you're understanding that there's a connection between you and something bigger, whatever that may be. And that you're calm and confident, and you trust yourself and your abilities and your skills. That you're strong and cohesive, and the different relationships in your lives are well and maintained. And there's health, both emotionally and physically. That you're fit, you feel good, you're ready, you're psyched, and that's where you are. Next one is reacting. So after a stressor comes, and a stressor can be one of many, many different things. One can find themselves in the reacting, in the yellow zone. That can also be the responding zone. So that's when stress is introduced and a threat is present. It can be a close call or a near miss or an actual traumatic event that happens. Your focus narrows down and your body is flooded with different chemicals and hormones that are designed to help you perform in a certain situation when stress does come. And there are changes from normal behavior, like around sleep and eating patterns, and your appetite might come down. You feel stressed, you feel tense, you're less focused, you're less interested in things, you're more irritable and pessimistic, maybe not as positive and optimistic like you were when you found yourself in the green zone. And there's distress, and the main goal, or something that helps you can help you respond or come back to the green zone, is to recover and build resilience, which means to rest, to realize that this happened and that you have to take actual steps to move back from the yellow back to the green. What else do I want to say about that? Oh, another thing that can be important to help move back from the yellow back to the green is understanding that a stressor is over. And I'm not talking about like an enlonged stressor. I'm talking about like a shorter stressor or an event that once it's over, to name, oh, it's over. The threat is gone, or at least decreased or reduced. And that might cognitively help one go back from the yellow back to the green. The next is the orange zone, the injured zone. So this is where it takes me back to stress and trauma, and to see it as an injury, that it's something that can happen to us and that we can heal from it. It's not necessarily a disorder, whether you have it or not. And so this is the injured zone. This is where after spending a long period of time in the yellow zone of stress and accumulated stress, one can find themselves in the orange zone and start really creating an injury. There's less not only loss of interest, but loss of motivation, loss of inspiration. Like it says here, there's unresolved loss and trauma. There's a lot of conflict. People tend to isolate and close themselves off to different connection and relationships, from work and friends and family. And this, people can tend to get stuck here because it can be overwhelming on the nervous system. It can be overwhelming on just like the body, and people can find themselves in despair and not knowing how to really get better. And this might be a good place to get some external support. Maybe talk to a therapist or a friend, or a medical provider, or a spiritual leader in your community. Someone who can really help guide you through this process, and get some perspective and some healing, and get some support. And then there's there's a red zone. In this phase, there's more like physical impact. So there's either extreme loss of weight or extreme gain of weight. There's much less energy because either there's disordered eating patterns or disordered sleeping patterns, and so there's change and flux in energy. And so like it says here, constant and disabling distress. And it can be hard for someone to really engage appropriately in certain situations. Really loss of any will, and find themselves in a pretty severe anxiety or depression. And one indicator of finding yourself in the red zone is that things continue to get worse. They don't continue to get better. And so that can be a red flag and say, oh, okay, I might find myself here in the red. What do I need to do? What kind of help and support do I need? And like it says here, relationships and work suffer because everything is intertwined. And yeah, and so all these are red flags and indicators that one might find themselves in the red zone. And this is a good, that might be a good time to really maybe go to the hospital, seek some professional support to help guide back towards the green zone. It's important to say that people can find themselves on the continuum, on the spectrum, and go from one stage to the other, and nothing is fixed here, and nothing is very dynamic. And so to just take it for what it is in terms of like feeling better, feeling more healthy, and being proactive in ways that you can support yourself or reach out for support, and try to find yourself going back towards the green. And understanding that sometimes it's not that easy, and sometimes people can find themselves in one of these zones for a longer period of time. And so there's no one way of doing this on either way of this continuum. And yeah, I also want to share on the Grief Fund, on the Climbing Grief Fund website, that this is a stress continuum for climbers. So this is on the AmericanAlpineClub.org under the Grief Fund, and this is in our psychoeducation website. And this just shares like the same concept of the stress continuum, and this time for climbers. And so people might find this more helpful in the language that is used here to see how this translates into their climate. I wanted to share on a personal note that in November of 2017, one of my best friends died in a climbing accident. And looking at these past 2.5 years and my fluctuation in the stress continuum of seeing myself sometimes at green and really focused and psyched and ready to go back to rock climbing and to be engaged at work and with friends and in other spaces. And then I also found myself in the reactive or the responding yellow zone of not feeling psyched, feeling confused, feeling lonely, and not functioning well at work or with friends. I was just pretty sad and down. And then I also found myself at times in the orange zone, in the more injured of I had like a few flashbacks on the crag after my friend died, and there were some times that I really freaked out of either like extreme fear or started screaming when I was on the rock. And I remember this one approach, I heard some noises in the bushes, and suddenly I had an image of a snake come and bite my face, and that's very far from any reality. And so these things, I just found myself also in those spaces, and I found myself isolating. I found myself in a place that it was hard for me to get out of bed at some point, and it was really important for me to seek professional help and go to a therapist and reach out to my community and my friends and reintroduce myself to climbing in a different way, and continue evolving my relationship with climbing and nature. Um, and yeah, because it was hard to reconcile um, after my friend's death, that something that I love so much can both like introduce him to my life and enrich my life in so many ways, and also take him away from me and be so painful. And finding myself in different zones at different times, and there was no one like checkbox of, okay, I'm in the red zone or yellow zone, or like it can be blurred. And it was really helpful for me to just name, like, oh, okay, where am I, what am I experiencing, how am I feeling, how am I functioning, and what is helpful in my life, what is resourcing to me, what is nourishing, what is supportive. And that can also be, it was really confusing at times, because sometimes climbing was helpful, and it felt healing and nourishing, and I felt so happy to be on the rock, and it was helpful in my process to just feel good. And at times I went climbing and it did the exact opposite, and it sucked, and it brought me more anxiety. It made me miss him more. um, at times it was just like avoiding dealing with the pain of his loss, and so I went climbing to numb myself. And so it was just really important to see, like, what was really happening, and to really be honest with myself of what really is helpful and what is less helpful, or what is serving me and what is not serving me. And through the framework of the stress continuum and the stress injury, it just really helped me not get through, but move through it, because I'm still in it, and to integrate it more into my life, it meaning my grieving process. Um, and I just found it extremely helpful. So I hope it can be helpful for others as well. Another framework that can be really helpful in understanding stress, grief, and trauma is something called the window of tolerance. This is a framework that a man named Dan Siegel, Dr. Dan Siegel, introduced it to the therapy world. And it talks about the overwhelm of the nervous system when stress, and trauma, or grief comes knocking at the door. And how do we really find ourselves, or how do we respond or react? So let me share this with you all. Okay. So this is similar in ways to the stress continuum that we talked about just now, and where the green zone is our window of tolerance. This is where someone can function well, can be in their element, can be focused, can be present. It says here the body is in an optimal state, can access both reason and emotion, and mentally engaged. So this is our capacity to cope with a certain situation, or tolerate the levels of stress. And then when a stressor comes and it overwhelms our nervous system, we can find ourselves outside of our window of tolerance, because there's an overwhelm of the nervous system. And then the way that it reacts, and maybe people have heard of the fight, flight, or freeze state. So this is exactly this. Someone can find themselves outside of the window of tolerance in a hyper arousal, and that's mostly the fight or flight. This is the overreactive, unclear thought, emotionally distressed. So both like physically and mentally hyper aroused. in the body with tension and breathing and blood pressure, and also thoughts racing. The things are faster, things are more intense. And in that way, there's an overwhelm of the nervous system. Or someone can find themselves in hypoarousal, which is more of the freeze state. So that person can find themselves numb or stuck or depressed, unmotivated. And that's another form of overwhelm of the nervous system. And so they find themselves in the hypoarousal. Now, depending on the resilience that we've covered of the person, and depending on the accumulated exposure to stress over one's life, the window of tolerance can be narrower or wider. And the narrower one's window of tolerance is it means that the threshold for that overwhelm of the nervous system is much smaller. And so one can find themselves more easily dysregulated or overwhelmed, and find themselves either in the hyperarousal or hypoarousal. And the wider someone's window is, it means that the threshold of their capacity for stress or stressors is bigger. And so there's more, someone needs more stress in order to find themselves in a dysregulated state. Again, either hyperarousal or hypoarousal. And this is a cycle. People can find themselves in different places, in different situations as well. And it's kind of like a dance, because going from a regulated state in the window of tolerance to a dysregulated state is also a part of life. And people have different stressors that overwhelm the nervous system, and that's just a natural part of being human. And some tools or practices that can help come back to the window of tolerance or come back to the green zone of the stress continuum if someone finds themselves in the hyperarousal, in the dysregulated state, is some mindfulness, grounding, breathing work, trying to calm the nervous system down, get some external support from someone. You can, just talk with someone, get a hug, take care of your body, rest, and just like try to calm the nervous system down to come back to the window of tolerance. And if you find yourself in hypoarousal, in that freeze state or that numbing, one can also use mindfulness and breath work and to bring themselves back online and connect their mind and body, and then try to elevate the energy a bit with some physical activity or exercise. So these are some examples of ways that people have found to be helpful when using the window of tolerance and in the framework of regulation and dysregulation, and how to come back to a regulated place. So after talking about a few frameworks to see stress or to navigate stress differently, hopefully better, hopefully this can help folks understand what is happening either to themselves or to others around them. We talked about the stress continuum, the stress injury, and seeing that stress is a part of life, and where you find yourself on the continuum is based on your exposure to stress and the accumulated exposure to stress, because certain events or exposure are stacked onto each other and they're not separate or isolated incidences. And then we talked about the window of tolerance and how much one can really tolerate certain amounts of stress and their capacity and threshold for those different stressors. And when they find themselves in a regulated state and they can tolerate, or they're dysregulated and there's an overwhelm of the nervous system, and either they find themselves in a hyperarousal state or a hypoarousal state, And again, hopefully this can help understand and navigate and shed some light on what goes on when stress comes knocking on our door, and how or what the natural reactions to those events are. And the next thing I wanted to talk about and highlight is how can we support someone else when we see them going through stress. And stress can be trauma, can be grief, can be whatever whatever event that is happening or that happened that is increasing someone's stress levels. And so how to really show up for them, how to support them, what to do. People don't have to be therapists to show up. People don't have to have degrees and titles to really be there and support. And yes, it's also important to understand what is appropriate in the scope of practice of what a therapist is educated and trained to do, and what a civilian or a citizen is trained or is appropriate for them to step into. So that's also really important to just to track and to understand, so we don't cause more damage, that we can really help in whatever ways we can. So the way that I see support and showing up is in the acute stages of what happens like during an incident, or the first stage after an incident, and what happens just throughout life and when it's not that acute stage. So let's talk about in the acute stage. What happens, either you find yourself, in the context of climbing or the climbing grief fund at a crag or in the mountains, and something happens to one of your friends, and how do you manage that situation from a mental health point of view? I'm not talking about a medical, physical, like wilderness first responder, EMT side. I'm talking about the mental health aspect. Or you're at home and you see a car accident, or there's been a death, or some event of violence or oppression, and so whatever event that happens, how can you support on the spot, and do it as well as you can. So first thing is safety. Kind of like any medical situation as well, it's safety for yourself and safety for the other person. So to try as best as you can to get both yourself and the other people out of harm's way, the immediate threat of whatever is happening, of that stress. And so if that is, someone had an anxiety attack when they were on a route, to bring them back to the ledge. If that was a car accident and someone, there was a crash, and to just bring them out of harm's way for that instant, and then to start addressing their mental health state just after that initial threat and stressor is on them. So that's first, that's safety. Next is just trying to calm yourself down. Notice where your regulation or dysregulation levels are, and to calm yourself down. And there's something called co-regulation. And so when we talk about nervous systems, there's the personal nervous system, then there's the social nervous system. And one person's nervous system can activate someone else's nervous system, and that is the social nervous system. The impact that we have on each other in how people regulate or not. And so if I continue to be regulated, and I breathe, and I talk in a certain tone, that has a direct impact on the breath and the tone and the regulation of the person in front of me. So it's also important to notice your levels of regulation, and to try to regulate yourself as much as you can. Come in a slow, talk in a slow, clear, concise way. So you're also direct. And hopefully that can impact and bring down the levels of dysregulation with the other person as well. Monitor our body language as well. And not only that, there's something about meeting someone where they're at. And so if someone is sitting on a curve, hugging their knees, and someone comes and wants to support them and standing in front of them, saying, "Hey, can I help you?" rather than sitting next to them and saying, "Hey, how are you doing? How can we do this together?" There's something about meeting the person and joining them, and so it's not from like an up down, that actually we're here in this together. And so understanding like what are the bodies, how are the bodies, what is threatening, what is what can be supportive, and so just noticing and tracking how your body language is. How can you be supportive also with your body? Next is you can use different senses. So if someone is super dysregulated, you can ask them like, what do you smell? What can you see? What can you hear? To start bringing that person's cognition back online. And you can ask them about orientation. You know, A&O times 4 is a term from Wilderness First Responder and Wilderness First Aid protocol. And so that's alert, awareness, alert, and orientation. So does that person know what day it is today? Does that person, who's president? Where are they? Can they count to 5? Can they name how many fingers are up? So just starting to get that person's cognition back online. And then the next stage is connecting between right and left brain. And so if there's enough trust established, you can take their hand and say, "Hey, press my hand the amount of times that I press yours." And so without saying anything, you can press 3 times, and then they press the same amount of times. And you can do that at several times. And so what that does is brings the body and the mind online. Just makes that connection in those pathways and neural pathways, and so it's a different type of communication. Another thing is eye contact. Again, if there's enough trust established and it's not more damaging or more threatening if you have eye contact, because that can be intense for some folks, and for some folks it can be really helpful to bring them back, because they get lost in their mind, and when someone goes through a panic attack or an anxiety attack, their eyes can be in different places, which means that most likely their mind are in different places as well. They're either replaying whatever happened, or they're stuck in this like worst case scenario thing. And what we want to do is bring them back to the present moment. And sometimes eye contact can really help with that, and just talking and having whatever conversation. Next can be compression. So when stress and fear overcome someone's body and experience, they kind of like, it's an out-of-body experience. It's really hard to describe, and I've supported numerous people with panic attacks and anxiety attacks, and what happens is they don't have control over their body, and there's an overwhelm of both the nervous system and the body. And so what can be really helpful is compression. Using different things around you, like let's say rocks or pieces of wood or sticks, to just like invite them and ask them to just squeeze, and then maybe touch and feel the texture, and then squeeze again. Or if there's a tree, something that can be really helpful and is to invite someone to really press against the tree, because something about the pressure with something that is stronger than me can really give someone a sense of confidence, a sense of safety, a sense of trust that I'm held, and it's also a discharge of energy. So another thing that can be really helpful is to allow someone to discharge energy if it's built up inside and they don't want to harm anyone. And there's still so much stress and anxiety built up and tension that it needs to be let go somehow. So that's another good way of discharging whatever like anxious energy someone has in a certain situation. Next thing that can be really, really important is to decrease helplessness. So trauma or traumatic symptoms are caused after an event when someone doesn't have the resources to cope with whatever is happening. So basically that means that if someone feels helpless, that there's nothing that they can do, that they're a victim in this situation, that really increases the likelihood of post-traumatic symptoms later on. And so what we can do is decrease those symptoms by empowering the person and allowing them to be more resourceful, to bring them choice, to increase their efficacy. So that means, hey, can you take time from me while I check your pulse? What do you want? Do you want water or Kool-Aid? Do you want to sit here or do you want to sit there? Can you help me carry this? And so really empowering the person with things to do to help them feel like they're trustworthy, that they have something to contribute and they have choice. Because a big part of trauma is that there is no choice, that this thing is imposed on me and I succumb to it. And bringing back agency of saying, oh yeah, I actually want to sit here, I want to sit there, or understanding that someone doesn't know what they want and they actually need someone to choose for them. And so maybe they're not there. And there are other choices that we can offer at least to empower the person in whatever they're experiencing. And the last two things that I want to mention here is validation. To validate that, to say like, hey, this is really hard. This is really stressful. This is to not necessarily go down the path of like, we're gonna get through this. We're gonna, it's gonna be okay. If that's helpful, yes, because hope is important, especially in the acute stages of, if you're stuck in the mountains and shit goes down, the sense of optimism and hope is important to maintain a certain level of mental health and perspective. And something about validating the levels of difficulty and adversity that is going on can really help someone feel seen and that they're not necessarily bad or weak or something else, that they're, this is happening and this is really hard. And so to validate someone in whatever is going on. And the last thing is taking care of self, because in all this, it can be really stressful. It can be painful to see someone else going through pain, can be hard. And different ways of taking care of ourselves so we can help and support and show up for others is so important, because if we don't, there's burnout, there's a secondary trauma where even though the trauma didn't happen to me, it's vicariously transferred to me because I'm not taking enough care of myself, because I don't have enough resources available to me to be able to stay regulated so I can support. And so it's just really important to monitor and track our own sense of safety and mental health as we support others. So we don't cause more damage either to ourselves or to other people, because our intentions are good and we want to make sure that our impact is good too. And the one thing I'll say about supporting people not necessarily in the acute stages of stress is to try, to continue showing up. The worst thing that can happen is someone say, actually, I'm okay, I'm good, or I'm not good, but I don't want your help, or I want to be by myself, or I want support from someone else. And to not let our own ego get in the way of supporting someone. And so just trying and to keep trying. And especially as an Israeli, I like to say, ask for forgiveness, not for permission. And so, yeah, to just keep trying, keep checking in, keep asking, like, how can I support? And also, the more you know that person, the more you love that person, to come up with your own ideas and to try yourself. And another thing is sometimes people just want to sit. People don't necessarily want to talk. They might not want to talk about their stress or their own struggles, and they just want to talk about something else, or they just want to sit in silence, or they actually really want to be asked about, like, hey, how are you doing? How are you feeling? How are you coping? And it's also important to understand, like, that we're not tippy-toeing around this person, that we're not caretaking this person because you're uncomfortable talking about it, so they're probably uncomfortable talking about it, and that might not be the case. So just understanding, like, where you're bringing your own stuff, and try to meet the person exactly where they're at in their own process. Okay, so we talked about mental health first aid, and how to show up in certain situations, how to support, and how to take care of ourselves. And hopefully that's been helpful in giving some tools, and packing or I don't know what the word is, but like helping us in our toolkit if and when something does happen, to know what to do. Because again, lack of resources or helplessness can also increase levels of post-trauma symptoms, also for the person who is not directly impacted by an event. So that's important too. So this is us educating ourselves and building our own resilience, to be able to show up. Next thing I wanted to highlight is the difference between resources and outlets and support systems. So in my last workshop about resilience, I used Lorca Smetana's metaphor of an alpine lake to see resilience. And I talked about the things that feed the lake, the different sources, the water sources that are feeding the lake, both in quantity and in quality. And these are the different things that are nourishing, supportive, healthy, things that are in place in my life that build my resilience, build my wellness. And I want to unpack that a bit and understand that it might be a bit more nuanced or complicated than that. So one thing is a resource, something that just like in a one-way street, so to speak, of that this is just really supportive to me. You know, going to therapy is pretty one way, and it's filling my lake in whatever ways it fills for me. Same thing of rock climbing or whatever relationship people have to nature that can be really resourceful and nourishing and supportive and healing even. And other things that is filling up with energy and resources. And then there are outlets, things that I'm actually discharging energy. I use my guitar playing as discharging energy. It's fun and creative, and so I get a lot like out of it. It does fill my lake, and I have a stressful day, or I'm feeling anxious or unmotivated. So I pick up my guitar, and it's a way to really put out tension or energy or stress. Same thing goes for physical exercise. That's also another way of discharging um, different energy. And so, what are our outlets? What are things that we go and do that are helpful to let go of energy? And what are things that are resourceful that fill up energy? And to also understand that there's a different balance to be had in those things as well. And then there are the support systems. Who are the people that are supportive? What are the places that are supportive? The activities, the experiences, the practices that I have in my life that are supportive to me. And so to just understand that in the world of resourcing, there's a lot to be said about it, and a lot of different ways to look at it as well. And I think unpacking that and understanding to put things in their respective place and naming them, I know it has been important to me when I do find myself in a stressful situation. Um, and then I ask myself, okay, this is how I feel. And what do I need? Do I need to just like be nourished and resourced, or do I need an outlet and discharge? What are my support systems, and what are my different practices and things that are helpful for me when I do find myself outside of my window of tolerance, or I find myself in the yellow, orange, or red zones on the stress continuum. The last thing I want to talk about today is what role nature plays in all of this. So we said that stress is a part of life, and my assumption is that nature is a part of your life too. And so how can we bridge the two and bring in healing through nature and through our relationship with the natural world? And so me as a nature-based therapist and as a rock climber who I just spend most of my time out in nature and engage in healing practices in and with nature, I just wanted to highlight a few things that I can offer and recommend folks doing, which I do both on my personal life and facilitate for others in my professional life as well. So the one is to take a moment and reflect. Like, what is your relationship with nature? What do you do when you go outside? How do you feel when you go outside? Also understanding that there are different levels of access to nature, and depending also on people's background and levels of privilege, they have different access to nature. And so just understanding that people have different relationships with nature based on that as well. And I think there's no right or wrong relationship with nature. It's a very individualistic or I guess individual process, and there's always like growth and intentions, and people can it can evolve, and also to understand that every relationship is beautiful as it is already. Also, another question that can be important is when has nature been helpful or beneficial in my life before, and how? And another question with that is, when has nature been hurtful or harmful or painful or caused distress in my life? And through these questions also to understand or helps understand like what our relationship to nature is. And I think the more awareness and understanding we have of the quality of that relationship can really help guide us and lead us to how it can be healing as well. The next is, and in what ways do we foster self-efficacy in nature? And self-efficacy, I talk about skills and competence, how it helps us in decision-making processes. What do I learn when I go outside around education, around geology and botanics and just meteorology? So different things about nature that I continue to learn and expand my knowledge and my resilience. And so how do I build and create my self-efficacy in nature and through nature? I do it a lot through my rock climbing and build my self-efficacy and resilience through my skills and competence, both like in how I manage certain situations and also just my physical abilities to rock climb. And also making fires for me in different ways. And so that's, you know, and all of these things have metaphors, and nature can be such a rich place to create metaphor in what is going on in nature, and how can that translate into my life as well, and what can I learn from this certain experience and this certain thing that I'm seeing or a part of, and what is the connection between that and the rest of my life. Another aspect of nature is it can really facilitate relationships with others. So I know for me, in going backpacking or rock climbing, that's such an incredible opportunity for quality time with a climbing partner or a friend or a community to go out camping and hiking. And there are so many different ways to spend time in nature. It can be in a park or a backyard, or a stroll on a piece of grass. And so it can foster these opportunities to create relationships with other people as well. Another is spirituality. And the way that I see spirituality is a connection to something bigger, larger than myself. And people's spirituality looks very different, and I'm not going to say that one is better than the other. I will share that a lot of my spirituality is connected to nature, and when I am in nature, it really gives me the sense that I am a part of something bigger, and both puts myself in perspective of like what I am and what I'm not. And also that I am a part of this ecosystem in a way. And there's a aspect of being in awe in nature, in a lightning storm or a rainbow or a frog. There can be certain elements of awe. And so I also see that under spirituality as well. And again, this is my perspective, and there are many other perspectives of spirituality and the connections between spirituality and nature. What I am saying is that nature can really foster a sense of spirituality and connection to something larger than self, which can be really beneficial in someone's healing process. Another thing is something about nature can have the potential of regulating someone's nervous system and really calming down. There's a lot of sensory stimuli in nature, and so connecting to the senses around nature with sight and hearing and smell and touch and even taste can really help someone's regulation levels to come down, or stress levels to come down and become more regulated. And there's also an invitation or an opportunity sometimes to slow down. And that looks differently for different people, but there is something about slowing down that can also really create or bring in healing when needed. I know for me, 8 months after my friend died, I suddenly found myself just rock climbing all the time in that 8-month period. And then I was like, let me slow down a bit and let me just go and sit next to the creek and listen to the water and put my feet in the cold water and to allow me to slow down a bit, because I just found myself going fast, 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 fast. And in a way, I was avoiding dealing with a lot of my pain. And something about nature really supported me in both like going fast and hard, and then also slowing down when needed. And lastly, it can offer an opportunity to discharge energy, like I talked about before. As a therapist, when people get or experience very intense emotions, and they don't know what to do with it, and they become maybe like violent or the potential of being harmful to others, there's so many opportunities to discharge energy in nature. And hopefully you can find yourself by yourself or with someone that can support you in that, so you don't scare anyone or cause harm to anyone else. But I've invited folks to throw rocks when it's safe, to throw rocks, and to throw rocks hard. And usually there are enough rocks. And sometimes someone just needs to get it out of their system, and there are different ways to do that. Throwing rocks is one, or pressing against a tree is another, or even doing sprints, or whatever intensity someone needs to experience to be able to get it out of their system and really discharge that energy, without hopefully causing damage to nature, or to anyone else. It can really offer that space to just like be ourselves. Nature doesn't judge, and to just be weird, to be intense, to be whatever we need to be. And that can also just be healing, because pain is also caused by not being seen or heard or understood or validated. And nature, in my experience, can really offer that, if we allow it to, or if we allow nature to. So I just wanted to recap what we went over today in the workshop. We talked about 2 frameworks of stress. We talked about the stress continuum, and seeing stress as an injury rather than a disorder. We talked about the window of tolerance and the thresholds people have for their capacity to tolerate different levels of stress. We talked about how to support others in their own stress, either on the acute stages of on the ground, in the here and now, or in the aftermath, and how to show up and support people as they process whatever they're processing, and hopefully in their healing process. Then we talked about the differences between resources and outlets, and what are the different ways actually that people fill up their own alpine lake. And then we talked about what role nature plays in all of this, and how we can really foster a relationship with nature to create more healing. Again, I wanted to acknowledge that there are a lot of people out there doing a lot of work and a lot of resources with material and content that people can continue educating themselves. If folks want to go to the Climate Grief Fund website, there are a lot of resources there. And I hope today's workshop was helpful to bridge between healing and support and nature. And I wish us all more of that. So take good care.